Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies this evening from Councillors Dixon, Hunt and Michaela Martin, and Councillor Hyman is substituting for Councillor Martin.
Good evening, Chair. Thank you. I wish to declare that I know the owners of the application, but I have no interest, pecuniary interest in particular, in the property, and I haven't been discussing this with the owners either. So I intend to continue in the debate. Thank you.
Non-pecuniary interest in that I'm an ordinary member of the Farnham Society and that my wife is the chair of the Farnham Society Planning Committee.
Yes, thank you. The same as Councillor Neil, in that I have met the owner of the site in the past.
None received, Chairman.
Yeah. Questions from members?
None received, Chairman.
And updates to government guidance on legislation in the last meeting. Chris?
Thank you, Chairman. No, there aren't any.
Okay, thank you very much. We move on to the main meeting, and there's only one application tonight to consider, and that's for public speaking. And it's WA 2021-02891, 8284 East Street, Farnham, GU9 7TP. The erection of a mixed-use building comprising of 23 flats and ground floor commercial floor space, together with associated landscaping, access and parking, following the demolition of buildings. We've several public speakers, but Ruth, do you want to present, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. I just want to draw your attention to an update sheet that was published yesterday. I also have one verbal update, and that is that Natural England have raised no objection to the development. So I'll just take you straight to the location plan. So the site is within the developed area of Farnham, and it fronts onto East Street, and the Farnham town centre boundary runs to the southwest of this junction. So this is an aerial photograph, and just to point out a few particular points of interest. So this is the Wallmead redevelopment site here. There is a nursery located here. This area here is largely residential. This is the application site. There's a relatively recent block of flats that has been constructed here that's called the Lionsgate development. This development originally formed part of a larger application site which included the current application site. So this redevelopment that has been constructed was approved along with the retention of the existing buildings on the current site that's the subject to this application. So this really is just zooming in a bit further, and again you can see the Lionsgate development here and our site that we're looking at tonight here. There's also a grade 2 listed building just here. So these are some photos from the street. So this is the application site, the former Jaguar garage. This is the Lionsgate development that I've referred to in the foreground. So this is looking from the east towards the west, and just beyond here would be the Wallmead redevelopment scheme. Photograph B is closer in of the site and taken from the west, from the corner of St Cross Road. This building here is considered to be a non-designated heritage asset. So its importance is not necessarily in its architectural merit, but more in terms of its historical significance, because it was a former wheelwright's shop. It previously has been listed, but it was delisted. It's not a building of merit, but it is considered to have some historical significance, although not much architectural merit. And the only part of the original building remaining, because it has been reconstructed, are some of the roof trusses. So photograph C is taken further back from the west. So this is the Walmead redevelopment site in the foreground. This is our application site here, and this is the Lionsgate development beyond, which you'll see is 3-storey with a 4th floor setback. This photograph is taken from St Cross Road, so looks across the rear of the site towards the western elevation of the Lionsgate development. This photo is taken further up St Cross Road. So this is the neighbouring dwelling immediately to the north of the site. This is the boundary wall of the site. And between this boundary wall and this dwelling, there's a public footpath. And this is just another view taken from St Cross Roads that shows you the dwelling immediately to the north and the dwellings beyond. This is a close-up of the Lionsgate development, and I've put these in to show you the windows that are in the side elevation of this development that face towards the existing building and would face towards the proposed development. So you have an understanding of the impact, potential impact on residential amenity when I get to that point in the presentation. So the proposal is for the demolition of the existing building and for the redevelopment of the site for a commercial use on the ground floor of about 120 square metres and 23 residential units. So this area in pink here would be the commercial unit. You would have 12 car parking spaces, and they would be undercroft car parking. You'll see on an elevation that I bring up that the site slopes. So this car parking, particularly towards the rear of the site, fits within that slope of the site. So at first floor level, you have a number of flats that are proposed. There are 7 flats at first floor level. Well, I should also point out, actually, apologies, on the ground floor plan, the access would be changing. Currently, the vehicular access to the site is more towards the rear. And as part of this redevelopment proposal, it would be brought forward further close to the junction of St Cross Road and East Street. Just also to point out, and I will come on to those later, that these windows here are oriel windows, and they have been designed to prevent overlooking to the neighbouring Lionsgate development, but I'll take you through that further in the presentation. So these are the frozen second and third floor plans. So again, it shows that you've got a number of flats. There's a range of 1 to 3, 1, 2 and 3 bed flats. Most of the flats have balconies, although some of them don't, and that is for matters in relation to privacy to the next door development. So these are the elevations. So the south elevation is the elevation that fronts onto East Street. The development has taken its cue from the existing building. So this gable feature has been put in as a direct reference to the existing building, along with this window here. The building is contemporary in design, but through the use of the recessed balconies and the interesting use of materials, it has got, the elevation has got some depth to it, and I'll bring up a coloured street scene plan so maybe you can see that a bit more. This is the east elevation, so this is the elevation that faced the Lionsgate development, and these are the oriel windows that you saw on the floor plan. This is the north elevation, and this is the west elevation. So the roof here would be clad in metal, and that's effectively a nod to the industrial past of the existing building on the site. And there are some, this is the entrance to the car park, and there are some ironmongers. They would be bespoke ironmongered gates that would make reference through the use of potentially a design that includes wheels that would be incorporated into the proposal, again as reference to the existing building. And this would also be a bargate stone wall, and that is a direct reference to the existing building. in order to incorporate, in recognition that the existing building is a non-designated heritage asset. So these are comparative street scene plans. So you can see the existing building, and then in comparison to the proposed building, officers are of the view that the scale and bulk of the proposed building is acceptable when viewed within the street scene. You can see there is some variation in height between the Lionsgate development and this building, but there isn't a significant height difference. And actually, we believe that that variation in height actually adds interest to the street scene. It's also our view that the development is of high quality design. Our urban design expert has reviewed it and considers that it's an enhancement of the street scene over the existing building, and is complimentary about the proposals. So this is the street scene from St Cross Road. And you can see I talked about the slope of the site earlier, and you get a better idea of that and how the car parking level cuts into that slope. And what that means is also that the dominance of the building is reduced. It's set down at the rear, and the reduced height, coupled with the fact that this dwelling is at a higher level, means that the transition between this building and the residential buildings behind, we believe to be acceptable. So just to take you through the heritage considerations, bearing in mind that we're dealing with a demolition of a non-designated heritage asset. So a non-designated heritage asset is a building or potentially a monument or a park that has a degree of significance meriting consideration in planning decisions, but which are not formally designated heritage assets. So because the building is being lost, the council's heritage officer has advised that substantial harm would arise, which is inevitable due to the fact that the building is being demolished. In terms of how that is treated with regard to planning policy, the NPPF states that the impact on a non-designated heritage asset requires a balanced judgment having regard to the scale of any harm or loss and the significance of the heritage asset. So officers believe that although the proposal would result in the loss of a non-designated heritage asset, the replacement building is of a high quality design, would result in improvements to the street scene. And we've also taken into account the fact that the existing building is of limited architectural merit, and the significance of the building is more in its historical significance. So if I just go through the consideration of the impact on neighbours. So I've mentioned before the oriel windows, and these would be to 6 flats within the development, 4 one-bed flats and 2 two-bed flats. And this image on the right just gives you a better idea of how they would appear. So essentially, the main piece of glass looking towards the Lionsgate development would be obscure, but the size would remain unobscure. So it is acknowledged in the report that this isn't ideal, and it would be preferable if it would be possible to have clear glass windows. However, this design solution means that there is some clear glass within the window itself. So there is some element of outlook afforded, albeit limited, but it does allow more efficient use of the site whilst ensuring that there is no harm in that respect to neighbouring residential amenity, with windows directly opposite neighbouring windows in the Lionsgate development. There are windows here, and again, I'll just move to the 3rd floor level here, that would be clear glass, but they are a distance of 14 metres away from neighbouring windows in the Lionsgate development. So officers do recognise that that is less than the guideline figure of 21 metres in the supplementary planning guidance. However, there is recognition in the supplementary planning guidance that separation distances can be reduced and that there is flexibility in certain contexts. And we have taken into account that this is very much an urban development site where you would potentially find reduced separation distances. And in addition to that, we have had regard to the fact that these windows don't sit directly opposite windows in the Lionsgate development. So they are slightly offset. So it's slightly offset from the window here to here, slightly offset from the window here to the edge of the window there. And again, here on the third floor, it sits in the middle of, it sits between this dormer here and these windows here. So officers have had regard to the impact on amenity and in terms of privacy as well. With regard to outlook, the proposed development will increase in scale, and it is acknowledged in the report that there are 2 windows that would experience some impact on outlook in the Lionsgate development, and that would be this bedroom here at first floor level and this bedroom window at second floor level. So there would be some impact on outlook to those windows, but again, we've considered the fact that it's an urban area and also balanced the benefits of the proposal of delivering much needed housing on the site. The applicants have also submitted a daylight and sunlight report. Officers have reviewed that in detail. It's considered acceptable with regard to daylight. In terms of sunlight, it's recognised that there are 5 windows where losses would occur in the winter months. However, there would be good sunlight levels when taken through the whole year round. So in terms of the principle of the development, that's considered acceptable. It's a brownfield site in an urban area of which more efficient use should be made. It should also be noted that the tilted balance applies. In land use terms, for the reasons set out within the report, the uses are considered acceptable. The scheme enables the commercial use to be retained, albeit smaller than existing, and the proposed residential use is considered appropriate. It does result in the loss of a non-designated heritage asset, but when balanced against the benefits, officers consider that as acceptable. And we also consider that the impact on the setting of the listed building that I mentioned at the start of the presentation is also acceptable. In design, I've mentioned the fact it's high quality, and we consider that it is an improvement to the street scene. In terms of highways matters, the relocation of the access has been considered by the Surrey County Highway Authority, and they consider that as acceptable in highways terms. There is a reduced level of car parking provision, so there are 12 car parking spaces proposed. If you compared that against the guidance, if you compare it against Waverley car parking standards, they would suggest a level of 31.5, and if you compare it against the County Highways guidance, it would be 23 spaces, and the difference there relates to the fact that the County Highway Authority's advice takes account of sites that are on the edge of a town centre where Waverley parking guidance doesn't. However, for the reasons set out in the report, it is considered that the reduced level of car parking provision is acceptable. The County Highway Authority has reviewed that element of the proposal and considers it acceptable. They're recommending a condition to ensure no knock-on effect on car parking, on-street car parking, that would ensure that residents of the proposed development would not be able to obtain car parking permits. And they have advised me that that is not unusual for them to have developments in Surrey approved with this condition, and they have the procedures in place to ensure that that actually does happen. They've also been mindful of the Woolmead appeal scheme just down the road that I highlighted in my presentation, where a reduced level of car parking along a similar percentage was proposed. It was refused on grounds of insufficient car parking, and an appeal inspector found it to be acceptable. So that appeal decision has very much been weighed into the balance in terms of the acceptability of the reduced level of car parking provision. And it's also the development is also considered to be in a sustainable location. I haven't touched upon affordable housing. No affordable housing is proposed. A viability report has been submitted. It's been independently assessed, and it's been concluded that the development isn't viable for affordable housing. In terms of quality of accommodation, the report does recognise that we have these oriel windows, which aren't ideal. It'd be preferable if they were just standard clear glass windows. However, when put into the overall planning balance, officers consider that that is acceptable and allows more efficient use of the site. Not all the flats have private amenity space, but there is some open amenity space within the East Street redevelopment scheme, and Farnham Park is in proximity, and the site is in an urban area, and it's often characteristic of developments in an urban area not to have, for units not to have their own amenity space. And we've talked about impact on residential amenity. In terms of impact on the SPA, there would be a contribution towards SANG, and SAM and Natural England have raised no objection. So this is a balanced recommendation for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Well, we have several public speakers tonight, and we'll start with John Lormer, who wishes to speak in objection to the application. When you start speaking, John, you have 4 minutes, and then you get a nice bell noise. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The opposition to this scheme is massive and includes many objections from those who are not directly affected but seek to protect the Town Council and Farnham Society, to name it two. The applicant has sought to exploit a loophole to justify the massive overdevelopment of a prominent site, for example, by timing the application over the Christmas period. The Lionsgate project was passed on the basis that the buildings at the west end of the site were retained. Instead, the developer left the building site surrounded by ugly hoardings and mess for the past 4 years. They now seek to intensively develop that area in a manner that was not what was agreed, either with the council or by those who bought the apartments in Lionsgate. The objections: no parking. The provision of 11 parking spaces, one of them is disabled, for 23 flats is ridiculous and totally ignores guidelines and common sense. Attempts to greenwash this issue in the desktop motion report have no connection with the reality of town life in a place like Farnham. Planning officer herself had no idea how you would travel to this meeting from the site by public transport. It may be that no parking permits will be issued, but this still leaves the hours between 6 p.m. and 8 a.m. every day and all day on Sundays, when new residents will flood the local roads of Victorian houses, causing inconvenience and danger. Will there be restrictive covenants on the new properties that no residents will seek to park a car within a mile of the development? If the developers believe their own reports, there can be no objection. The provision of £100 and a bike rack is simply a derisory distraction. 2, safety. There's been no sensible review of safety. The junction of East Street, St Cross Road and Lower Southview is a busy area which is frequently congested already. It's narrow, has vehicle approaches from 3 directions and poor visibility. It also has entrances to a nursery school and funeral directors. The entrance to the tower block will add a further input to this dangerous area. The motion desktop report says that there have been no accidents in this area, and so there is no problem. This is like saying nobody's been run over on the M3, so it's a safe place to take a stroll. The Highways Authority and County Council have ignored previous warnings from local residents and say that until somebody is killed, they will take no action. The motion report of vehicle movements are guesses, do not even take account of current traffic, particularly deliveries and parents dropping off children by the roadside. 3, it's too big, out of keeping with the surroundings and not in accordance with the character of Farnham, monetising every inch of the site up to the boundaries against guidelines. 4, it's ugly and not of a style appropriate to a historic town such as Farnham, against the guidelines. 5, loss of light to many of the surrounding properties, against the guidelines. 6, loss of privacy includes Farnham Estates customers who will now be directly overlooked at a range of 14 metres, against the guidelines. 7, poor building standards, barely meeting minimum space standards and not complying with building regs. No light in the densely packed flats and no opening windows. Hardly a building of quality is claimed, against the standards. No consideration for the environment, no outside space, no sustainable heating systems, no thought of biodiversity, non-sustainable materials against the standards. In conclusion, this is inappropriate overdevelopment of a prominent site which we detrimental to the community, offers poor accommodation and benefits nobody but the developer who's already subjected the area to sharp practice, mess and disruption. It is objectionable to anybody who have to see it, pass it, or have to interact with it, let alone those who will have to live with the disruption while it's being built and then endure the consequences thereafter. It's a cynically executed project by those who have already misled not only the planners, but those who paid for their previous efforts. The planning report details the complete disregard of the standards. Thank you very much.
David Maddox, and he was speaking for his application. You've got 4 minutes too, David.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight, Chair. I'm the agent for Farnham Estates, which is the applicant and a local developer that has been registered, based and operating in Farnham since 1993. Farnham Estates has a track record of delivering high quality new homes in Farnham, being the developer of the adjacent Lionsgate flats. Farnham Estates also has other major land holdings in the town that are allocated for development, which we are in the process of bringing forward with your officers. I say this because it shows that Farnham Estates has a record of delivery and that has a long-term interest in building high-quality developments in Farnham, particularly in the immediate area along East Street. Because of this, we spent over a year discussing the scheme with officers and the Farnham Society before submitting our planning application. In that time, our proposals have changed fundamentally, and the design that's before you tonight was heavily steered by your design officer and indeed the Society. We only submitted the application when we received extremely positive and supportive feedback from your design officer, and when the Society had told us that the design was a very good approach and that we had made a wealth of detailed changes to the scheme to meet its requests. You'll be aware that your heritage officer has identified the existing building as a non-designated heritage asset, but we think that this is without sound evidence. As you know from my letter, we've provided evidence to your officers that the original building was effectively completely demolished in the 1980s, such that the existing building itself has little to no heritage value. The government has agreed with this when it delisted the existing building following the demolition of the original building. Surely, if there was any apparent heritage value in the existing building, then it should be on your buildings of merit list, which it's not. I must say that it is a very unusual practice to identify buildings as non-designated heritage assets during the planning application process. Notwithstanding this, if any parts of the original building are found in redeveloping the site, then we have accepted conditions that require recording of the building, and we're very happy to set aside any pieces for any local group who may be interested in taking them. The reason why affordable housing is unviable is because the scheme generates well over £700,000 of SIL contributions for local infrastructure projects. Most importantly, though, this is a real opportunity to provide decent homes for local people who want to live close to the town centre, which will ultimately take the pressure off developing on greenfield land and intensifying more suburban areas that are better suited for family homes. This is a critical issue for your borough because the current lack of a 5-year housing land supply and the presumption in favour of sustainable development means that unless we can build more housing on your urban brownfield sites, then your suburban areas and greenfield land are under real threat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, the next vote is Councillor John Scotty Fraser from Farnham Town Council. Good evening, Mr. Fraser. And you have 4 minutes, Mr. Fraser. 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Councillor John Scotty Fraser, lead member of the Planning and Licensing Consultative Group of Farnham Town Council. 55 pages of appendix implies a comprehensive treatment, but the agenda before you is partial and, in our opinion, not fully comprehensive. Much is written about the proposed construction being desirable, acceptable, and sustainable, of the unmet need for land availability for development in Farnham. But I believe Farnham Waverley's local plan part 1, taken together with Farnham's neighbourhood plan as now amended, grants sufficient land availability without the need for a huge pigeon loft scheme on an inadequate site. You will be aware of the proposed 23 small flats with provision for a mere 12 off-street parking spaces. Withholding permits is unlikely to prevent parking on local curbsides. These are not folk who cycle or walk to work. They will drive a car, probably one each. These are market flats, none affordable. So accommodation will be expensive, but they have inadequate windows and obscured glazing to prevent overlooking. Beyond modest balconies, there is an absence of recreational space, no amenity. I note little reassurance regarding the cumulative congestion of the infrastructure locally. The proposed building is overdeveloped, it is too large and dominant. The scale and density are harmful to a degree which outweighed public benefit. A comprehensive treatment would have concentrated more adequately upon architectural matters, the merits of history, archaeology, and the intrinsic aesthetic values now being promoted by our Secretary of State. I refer you not to dismissive agenda paragraphs, but to worthy papers submitted by the Farnham Society, the Surrey Historic Buildings Trust, and by the Arts and Crafts Movement in Surrey, which, taken together, provide an admirably comprehensive description. We in Farnham Town Council are not overly impressed by replicated scraps of vernacular masonry and a patronising memorial plaque. We call for the retention of the 17th century wheelwright shop in its present form and context, despite its unfortunate, albeit existing, non-designated status. Its loss will cause irreparable harm to Farnham, depriving us of a heritage asset of architectural value that makes a significant contribution to the town. This application, if granted, perpetuates an incentive for profit with little redeeming contribution. We would recommend a restoration of the traditional working building, a beneficial enhancement which would avoid robbing the neighbourhood of a contribution to our important cultural identity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Right, we move on to the next topic we get, which is Councillor Andy MacLeod, the ward councillor. Good evening, Andy.
Thank you, Chair.
You've got 4 minutes now and 4 minutes afterwards, if you still wish.
Thank you very much, Chair. Again, rather like last week on the Hawthorns application, I think the committee has a difficult decision to take here. There are two particular reasons why it's difficult. One is the fact that the tilted balance is engaged, as the planning officer had mentioned, and also the fact that the officers have recommended approval. And we always need to take the officers' recommendations seriously. However, we still, as a committee, or the committee still has the right to turn down the application if they wish to do so. And they did that last week, so that can still happen. But you have to remember that the two things that I already mentioned. I think councillors always are inclined to refuse applications where we get so many objections from our residents and also from the town council and from the Farnham Society, but that can't be the only consideration. There are a number of good reasons to refuse this application, and they've been mentioned in the very good contributions from the public speaker and also in some of the objections. I was particularly impressed by an objection from I don't often mention, in fact, I don't know if I've ever done before, a specific objector. There was a lady called Janet Galili who had spent a great deal of time, a very well researched objection to the application. And the objectors have specified a number of good reasons to refuse the application. The architecture, the overdevelopment of the site, the overlook of neighbours, the non-designated heritage asset that had been discussed, and the parking issue. Although I think we have to be a little bit careful in the parking issue. We have to remember that a planning inspector ruled against the council on that issue in terms of the Woolmead site, which is very close by. But residents are very concerned, and for good reasons, I guess, in terms of the amount of parking that will be lost if people start parking in the roads. The final point I'd make, of course, that these houses are just not necessary for the local plan or the neighbourhood plan, and that's an important consideration as well. On the other side of the coin, however, unlike last week's application, this one is in the built-up area of the town, and it's on previously developed land. It's close to the town centre and to facilities, which means it will be regarded by, it has to be regarded by the officers, and it will be regarded by any planning inspector as a sustainable development. And we have to remember that the tilted balance does apply. So this is a very difficult decision, I think, for the committee. Last week, I strongly recommended that the committee refuse the application. This week, I'm still inclined to want to recommend that. But I think I want to hear, before I come back with my final comments, what the other members of the committee, or what the members of the committee have to say, because it is a difficult decision for the committee to take, Mr. Chairman. So with your agreement, I will come back and speak again at the end. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor MacLeod. Just in time. Thank you very much, Councillor MacLeod. That's why we're here, to make decisions, I suppose. Right, I just want to make a simple, before we say open the debate, I want to make a simple statement. I'd like to remind all members that each application must be assessed on its own relative planning merits, and the fact that an alternative scheme could be developed that may or may not be considered architecturally preferable would not in itself represent justification to refuse permission. Who wants to start the debate? Oh, Councillor Coburn and then Councillor Edmonds.
I really just wanted to clarify something, Chairman, if I may,
Sure.
because two people at least have said that, you know, this is unacceptable in terms of the neighbourhood plan. That just isn't right. Inside the built-up area boundary, we rely on windfalls, and because we didn't allocate sites that were less than under 0.2 hectares, a lot of our windfall sites are relying on anything between 1 and 25 to come forward. So, you know, this is not allocated, but it wouldn't be allocated because it would come under our windfall sites. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. I've done a lot of background work on this application because it raises a number of concerns for myself. The first thing is the High Court has quashed a Bristol City Council grant for planning permission for a 62-home development on a former zoo park. The court order confirmed that the decision was taken on the basis that the recommendations which had failed to properly consider the level of heritage harm, failed to properly weigh up the harm and public benefit, and which had not set out a clear and convincing justification for the heritage harm under the National Planning Policy Framework. The second thing that concerns me is the lack of affordable housing. There's no agreed definition of affordable housing. The most commonly referred to definition of affordable housing is set out in Annex 2 of the National Planning Policy Framework. The Affordable Housing Commission 2020 concluded that many of these products are clearly unaffordable to those on middle and lower incomes. Sustainability depends on social issues. Affordable housing should be based upon income, not the market. The market is distorting the situation such that many people are denied homes because we're not building enough affordable homes. Affordable homes have been ruled out of this development, yet it is my understanding that councillors can confidentially receive the information which carried out this exclusion. I, for one, am not aware that we've been offered this information. To go to the National Planning Policy Policy number 11, it states that plans and decisions should apply a presumption in favour of sustainable development and emphasise sustainable and not development. Where there is no relevant plan policies, which we're currently under, granting permission unless the application of the NFPA policies provide clear reason for refusing development, or any adverse impacts would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against all the policies in the framework. This is 217 policies. The Supreme Court has emphasised courts interpret policies, and for planning authorities, they exercise judgment in applying it. There are a number of policies in the framework which are relevant to this one. The first is sustainable development, not merely development. The second is planning conditions should be kept to a minimum. I think for this development, we have 24. They must be enforceable. I'm not sure that we have the resources to enforce them. They should be of good design. I can't see that it's good design to have a metal roof. Local planning authorities should seek to ensure the quality of the approved development is not materially diminished between permission and completion. I don't think the LPA have a very good record of achieving this. Planning for climate change. I heard no reference to climate change. We should proactively approach mitigating and adapting climate change. Heritage assets have already been mentioned. When I look at local plan local plan 2002, policy D1 and policy D4, I cannot see that this application complies with it. And then having listened to the officer and have further concerns that this development is next to nursery, I've listened to see what everybody has to say before coming to the conclusion. But at the moment, it looks as if that I cannot support this planning application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Edmonds. I think I'll ask the officers to answer some of those questions towards the end, okay? Councillor Neil.
Thank you, Chair. I've looked at these documents in some detail, and in particular the design and access statement, which seems to me very comprehensive and has a lot of reference to the design, the mass, and all these aspects, which seems to have been taken into account. It does seem to have taken into account comments from the Farnham Society in the earlier round of discussions as well, it seems to me. And I'm also noting what the officers have said, as well as the various objectors that have come along in front of us. On the parking side, I think it is probably realistic, being in the central town centre area, to consider that we do have reduced parking allocation. That seems to be the way forward. There might be some car share coming forward in a scheme like this, and I think there will be a number of people who would be wanting to occupy some of these flats these days without car spaces. So I'm not too worried about that one either. In terms of the windows on the Lionsgate side, I think I'm right in saying that the obscure windows are bedroom windows. So obviously the privacy is two-way. That provides privacy into the bedrooms as well. And I think that some of the other windows on the more living room side of the flats are non-obscure. So they do have an outlook, and some of those windows open as far as I can see. So I think on the balance, in terms of the overlooking to the neighbours and all those aspects, again, I'm fairly relaxed. And I also note what Councillor Coburn has said about the windfall aspects of these developments. So that would seem to be in favour of agreeing with the officers as well. So at the moment, I'm minded to support the officers on this particular application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Neil. Councillor Rubini.
Thank you, Chair. I've been looking at this and wondering which way to go. I can hear the arguments on both sides. I am happy that, in fact, our officers have worked closely with the developer to bring out a design that both parties there feel echo the surrounding areas. And looking at the sketches, it does seem to be nice within that context with the adjacent premises. My problem with this, as it always is the lack of affordability, which has already been stated. I am very concerned that time and time again, we're getting houses, flats, whatever built in town centres, and the developers coming forward and saying, sorry, we can't put affordable housing here. We just cannot do it because of the profit levels. I'm sorry, but despite viability, and I know we've done our own checks, I cannot understand why somebody will buy the site knowing it's going to offend against the principles of building affordable housing. So I'm finding that very difficult, not just for this site, but other sites as well, to continually be told we cannot put affordable housing in town centres.
Thank you very much. Any other councillors to speak? Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, this time I will be supporting the officers. Last week I didn't because it was on a greenfield site, and the councillors did say last week that one of the things was that they would be relying on windfall sites, and as Councillor Coburn says, these are windfall sites in the urban area, brownfield sites. And I know some people have said that they don't like the design. Quite frankly, in the nearly 20 years I've been a councillor, it's one of the best looking block of flats, be it 4 stories, that we've seen. We've had some recently that were just 3 stories and a little bit of a roof, very plain and boring. And I think the applicants have gone out of their way with the heritage officers here to actually make something that is, it's not what everybody wants. Nobody wants anything on their back garden. Nobody wants windows overlooking. If you live anywhere else, my daughter's flat in Battersea, literally you could throw a skipping rope into the balcony of the flat next door. They're only, well, literally from there to there, but nobody minds because you don't have to buy it if you don't want it. So I will be supporting it. And I think that the local ward councillor actually summed it up by saying he wasn't sure what he was going to say, but he certainly wasn't wholeheartedly against it. And if the ward member is slightly like that on balance, he knows absolutely everything. And I would be supporting his not so sure, but I am sure, and I will be supporting the officers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor James. I've got 2 more councillors speaking, and then I'll come back to the officers. Councillor Coburn.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just to sort of expand on the point I made and the point that Councillor James has made, you know, we do look for these sites to come forward in the town centre. As everyone said, we allocated greenfield, brownfield sites, but it was on the, or with the proviso that windfall sites would come along and give us the numbers that we need on a regular basis. And in fact, at one of the recent appeals, the inspector actually mentioned that, saying how good the delivery of windfalls was in Farnham. So, you know, we need these sites to come forward. I'm like everybody else. I'm not for it 100%. I do have a problem with obscured glazing. I always have. And when my son moved into St George's Road in Farnham, which is a bit like Councillor James was explaining, you know, you sort of cheat by jowl. We got these wonderful slatted blinds, and I'd never come across them, never having lived like this. And quite frankly, I'd much rather have clear glass with these blinds that you can completely we can have any amount of light you want, you know, from sort of none to a maximum. And I think they're absolutely superb. But, you know, I understand when you're doing a planning application, you have to build in certainty. But I don't like that. I am worried a little bit about all sorts of things, about the size of one or two of the apartments, lack of perhaps not so much amenity space, but, you know, what I always have a problem with in the town centre, which is clutter. I don't know if I'm just the messiest person in the world, but, you know, I always have clutter. And, you know, the more flats you put in, the more clutter you have. I mean, just to me, it goes with life. And I think sometimes we're a bit unrealistic about, you know, what clutter will actually come. But having said that, it's like everything else. I'd rather it was had all been done as a oneer and the whole thing looked, you know, slightly different. But given where it is, given what it is, given the work that's been put in, I have no problem with the heritage asset aspect of this, because it really is, people would just see a garage. They've been driving past this without realizing. I mean, it's very prepossessing building, but I do like the idea of reminding us about Sturt and his history as a wheelwright on that site. So, you know, as long as that's there, I think the applicant has done the right thing. So yes, like everybody says, I'm not 100% for it, but on balance, I think this is acceptable on that side. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Keane, and then I'll come to the officers. Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, like Councillor Coburn, I don't like obscure glassy windows. I think it's quite depressing when you're looking through and you can't see anything. I'm not really very happy about the lack of light in some of the flats. Again, you know, having to have lights on half the day because you can't see, you know, much daylight is not very good. And I am deeply sorry that we haven't got any affordable housing in this. We always bang on about it, and certainly Councillor Rubini does. But as we've all got to acknowledge, it's a windfall site, and even with all the things that I feel against it, I will not be going against the officers. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Hyman.
I think actually Councillor Hess was before me, but you've missed him his indication. He can, if he wishes, go before I. Okay, thanks. I actually take a different view here. I very much want to support this, but I mean, I know nothing about architecture, but I'm just not enamored by it, and that's personal. I do think that we could do better, but as I say, I'm not an expert on that. I'm rather surprised that others don't see it quite that way, because I think some residents do. I'm also concerned that we've got no affordable housing. We've got the sunlight just okay on average. I think we can do better on that as well. I know that this developer wants to do good things in Farnham and try and have things which do look good. And so I was a little bit surprised. I appreciate they spent a long time talking to Waverley. Ideally, I want the old wheelwright shop retained. I mean, that is, it's a big part of Farnham's history. George Sturt is a big part of the history. And if we could retain it, that would be brilliant. I think, you know, our long history of motoring in the town is very important to us, and I know a lot of other people care about that as well. As an alternative, we could move it to the Rural Life Centre, perhaps for a couple of £300,000 or whatever, and I really wish that we were having that looked at seriously. But you know, we've got quite a number of policy departures here, but looking at all of the information available online and knowing what the constraints are, we've been told that the tilted balance is engaged. It's not. The law dictates what we can, can't, and must do. I've checked the pro forma appropriate assessment. It's not an AA. It's a screening assessment. Agreeing to take money is not a substitute for a full appropriate risk assessment. And I think at this time we should stand up for the law and turn around and accept that the MPPF says the presumption and tilted balance are not engaged, because we do not have a detailed assessment of the effectiveness of Farnham Park. If anyone's got that. And if they'd pass it to me, please, I'd love you to do that. But we don't actually have an assessment of the effectiveness of Farnham Park or of Natural England's sound strategy. I was Martin Darcy, actually our councillor who represents us at the JSPB, was there last week, asked a pertinent question, and Natural England confirmed it's their ultimate aim to have some evidence, but they haven't got it. Ultimate aim was what they said. They don't have it at the moment. So we need to pressure them for that. So we know exactly how much development we can put in Farnham and elsewhere in the borough. Do this properly. So as the law dictates what we can and can't do, I've got to vote against this. It's not difficult for me, because otherwise on all the other issues it is. But I do think that in the few months that it might take us to get together an assessment so that we know exactly how much we can put the development we can put in place, that we should be asking the developer if they can do something more for us in the retention of the rural life, moving it to the rural life centre, putting it in place with a different design, whether there's any other options they've looked at. I would very much prefer that we just try a little bit more, because of we're steeped in motoring history around here. And I think we could come under a lot of criticism for a development with not enough parking, no affordable housing, all the things that we're told, it's not viable development, so we can't have anywhere else. We're being told actually that by our residents, this isn't acceptable, we shouldn't be doing this. As the deputy chair has said, we really shouldn't be putting in too little parking and no affordable housing into these schemes. So I do appreciate the efforts that the developers gone to, and I can see exactly what everyone has who's spoken in favour of the development. I agree with it to a long extent, but I just want Farnham to know that we are doing our utmost to make sure that we are retaining history, because you can't go back once you've made a mistake on this sort of thing. Can we try a little bit further and put pressure on Natural England to produce the appropriate assessment, so that we can we can consent something on this site that's appropriate sometime in the near future. We certainly can't now, we don't have the assessment, but if Natural England are put under pressure, if we just turn around and rightly refuse this on a grounds of no appropriate assessment of the effectiveness of Farnham Park as sang, and all the other policy departures which we've got, design, car parking, obscure glass, sunlight, affordable housing, lack of amenity space, then those can all be overcome, absolutely sure, if we have an appropriate assessment in place, and the tilted balance will then apply. But without an appropriate assessment, the tilted balance doesn't, and policy applies. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to vote against this. I want to try a bit harder on our history if we can. I've read the things we've had from the various history groups and from the arts and crafts movement in Surrey send us a lot of information. I agree with what they're saying to a large extent. Can we just go a little bit further, please? Thanks.
Yeah, Councillor Hess.
Thank you, Chair. I've heard a lot of comments from fellow members, and they're all very valid and substantial comments, such as the points that Councillor Hyman was just making. I'd like to thank the officers for the work they put into this, and the work they put into all of these big applications. And I know it's very difficult, because everybody, including committee and officers, have to consider the applications as submitted by applicants. Now, with the case of 80 to 84 East Street, it's a key site. And given the planning history of this site, and that permission was actually granted in August 2016 for a redevelopment for 14 flats, I'm pretty confident that this site will be developed in due course. But hearing the debate tonight and reading the objections from Farnham Town Council, the Farnham Society, the Arts and Crafts Movement, and a very well-researched objection that Councillor MacLeod referred to from Jeanette Galini, it's clear that this design, to me, is not appropriate for Farnham, which, as we all know, is a small Georgian market town, but really more suitable for places like Croydon or Reading, frankly, much more urban towns or cities. As with the recent application at the Andrews Garden Machinery site in Hindhead, where the committee were minded to approve a scheme for a nursing home, but not the design submitted, it was refused, but with an invitation to the applicant to reconsider the design and come back with new proposals, which is exactly what happened, and the scheme was granted planning permission. So this is what I suggest happens to this application before us for 80 to 84 East Street, and hopefully a satisfactory result for the applicant and the town, which will have to live with what is built for years to come. We really do want to ensure that we get the right thing that will set off this part of the town for the future. So that's really my comment. Thank you very much, Chair.
Officers, a number of questions have been asked. Any answers?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to, if we go back to Councillor Edmonds' comments relating to the consideration of the loss of the non-designated heritage asset. Just to take you to pages 21 and 22 of the report, and in particular the top of page 22, where I refer to paragraph 203 of the NPPF that talks about how you weigh up the impact on non-designated heritage assets. And actually it's something that I touched upon in my presentation. In weighing applications that directly or indirectly affect non-designated heritage assets, the balanced judgment will be required having regard to the scale of any harm or loss and the significance of the heritage asset. And throughout the report, we have had regard to that paragraph, and we feel we have done that balancing exercise appropriately. There's been lots of mention about affordable housing and councillors' dismay that none is provided, and it's really just to reiterate that all the viability information is available on the website and has been for some time for people to review. There's been questions about the environment and taking account of climate change. So just to say that that is touched upon, there is a section on that in my report. There is a condition that requires electric vehicle parking spaces. I think I have said in my report there's a condition about the standard 110 litre of water per day. Having looked at the conditions, I think that one is actually absent. So that is a condition that I suggest we add. That's just an error on my part. And I think the only other thing to say is that through building regulations, those have just been updated this month. And so there is a higher level that developers have to achieve in order to make sure that their developments are as environmentally friendly and sustainable as can be in terms of installation and other things. So there is, as well as planning, there is that additional layer through building regulations. And just to pick up on, obviously, some councillors have raised concerns about the design and the idea that potentially we could seek amendments to it. I really just want to reiterate that our urban design expert is highly complimentary about the design of this building, and actually unusually so. And the applicant has worked really hard, and it has changed quite a bit since they first came to us with their pre-application submission. And we are of the view that it is an enhancement to the street scene over the current building. Thank you, Chair.
Right, I think we'll go to Councillor. No, you want to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Just a few small points. This is an ideal site for development. There's no doubt about that, but this development's much too big. A smaller development will be ideal. The bulk mass and height of it are just too big. Non-affordable, again, we keep coming up against this. I would love to see a figure of what affordable is. Even these tiny flats aren't affordable. So I would like to see a figure of what is affordable there, because this is something we've never ever had in the past. Thank you.
Right, Councillor MacLeod. Councillor MacLeod, hello.
Sorry, Chairman.
I do apologise, Councillor Monaghan. So, Councillor Monaghan.
Thank you. I wasn't going to say anything, but I think I do feel that there are aspects to this particular application which are not ideal. I'm not particularly bothered by the heritage aspect, simply because the building which will be lost is not original in almost all its physical form. But I do think that it is too tall. And if you compare it to the Lions Gate building, it does seem to rather dominate it. I must admit, I am concerned about the degree of density. I can see the argument for making the most efficient use of the site, but these are not generously proportioned apartments. Although I do take the point that people have freedom to decide whether it's what they want. You certainly won't have families as such, I'd have thought, because there's no amenity space, unless you want to go walking, which is fine in principle, and in summer, in nice weather, less good in winter when the light levels are low and it may well be raining. So although I can understand the arguments of colleagues who are content with this, I think on balance, I am not. And I would not shrink from saying that these defects do outweigh the benefits by the margin required by the tilted balance. Thank you.
Do you want to come back on that one?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to say, in terms of the unit sizes, they're all set out on page 31 of my report. And we have had regard to the government's technical housing standards, and all the units do accord with that. Thank you, Chair.
Do you want to add something, Chris?
Thank you, Chair. Just one very brief point that, as I'm sure members are aware, there is an appropriate assessment that officers have carried out, and it is on the website. And we have had Natural England look at that and confirm that there's no objection to the appropriate assessment. Thank you, Chair.
Right, Councillor MacLeod, I finally come back to you. Councillor MacLeod, you have the last 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think the discussion has shown that this is a difficult decision, and unfortunately, I think most councillors have probably made up their minds. So anything I say will not make much difference, I don't think. But in terms of my own position, I have to be honest and say I'm rather torn on this one. As a local member, I would very much want to see this refused, because that's what my residents want. But that's not the basis on which we can take decisions. And we have to take them objectively and so on and so forth. And there are reasons why I'm worried about refusing this application, in that I think that I was previously a portfolio holder for planning. And from my experience there, I think this is one where there's a very good chance if we refuse it, the applicant might well win an appeal. And that needs to be a consideration, in fact, because it costs the council a lot of money to defend appeals, and it doesn't help the council's reputation if it loses too many appeals. So a couple of comments I'll make on things that have been said. I think it was very good that Councillor Coburn made it clear the point about windfalls, but on the other hand, of course, just because something's a windfall, it doesn't mean it should be approved. It still needs to be looked at on its merits. But Councillor Coburn was right in saying that it's not in that sense part of the development plan, and that is a factor as well. On the affordable housing issue, actually, again, this is something that concerns me greatly. I think all the councillors who have spoken to that are absolutely correct. I don't know if anyone else happened to notice it, but recently there's been some publicity from the relatively new Secretary of State, Mr. Gove, who's actually showing a different attitude towards this sort of thing from previous Secretary of States. I'm hopeful that things are going to change here. because in recent interview with a journalist, he was talking about this affordability issue and really criticising planning. So how the big housing developers, not necessarily smaller ones like Farnham Estates, for the level of profitability that they're making, and that they're not going on with building houses fast enough and the quality isn't good enough. So there's possibly some good news there from the Secretary of State. They might change things in the future. So I guess that's my comments, Chairman, and I think I have to leave it to the committee to decide for themselves. In some ways, I would hope they refuse it, but I would fully understand if there's reasons why they feel, members who feel that they have to allow it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Right, we're going to move to the recommendation. The recommendation is recommendation A, that subject to the applicant entering into a legal agreement by, I think that's meant to be the 27th of December 2022, not 2021, to secure contributions towards Sang and Sam, travel plan vouchers, the funding and procurement of the necessary tariff regulation order required to amend the existing on-street car parking bay on St Cross Road, free membership and first 25 miles of Farnham Car Club, SUDS and car park maintenance and management, and subject to conditions as amended and added to by Ruth, and informative permission be granted. And recommendation B is that in the event of the requirements of A not being met, permission be refused. Those in favour, please raise their hands. And against? Louise?
I thought you voted for.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, yeah, but now you said against.
Yeah, no, just a minute. Against? Against? Abstentions? Abstentions? No. 1. Right, what's the vote, Louise?
Thank you, Chairman. That was, sorry. Thank you, Chairman. That was 6 for, 4 against and 1 abstention.
The application is therefore granted. That's all for tonight. Thank you very much and have a safe journey home, folks. Bye-bye.